Hey, Fragrance Family, I'm David.
I'm Jer.
And we're the Fragrance Bros! Coming at you this time with another interview, this time with the lovely Yosh, the perfumer and founder of Yosh Fragrances. So how you doing, Yosh?
Hi, everyone. I'm Yosh, live from San Francisco.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you so much for letting us interview you and coming on with us. We really appreciate it. Of course, YouTube knows our love for Yosh Fragrances. We've reviewed Sombre Negra, gave it an outstanding score, and then we talked a lot about your whole line. So I guess we'll just go ahead and start with the questions.
All right, let's roll.
Our first question is kind of a standard one, but what is your first fragrance memory, and what started your love for fragrances?
That is a really good question. I think, I gotta take this off.
Forget you had it on.
So my first fragrant memory was probably on a family vacation to Hawaii. And I remember walking into a store and thinking, oh, I love this. What is this? And it was an old Shiseido fragrance that I don't think is even on the market anymore. But now that I know, it was the smell of violets and irises. And that's been for me like this holy grail that I've never been able to replicate it. I've never smelled it again. And it really just kind of left like a fingerprint or like a memory foam. So that olfactory memory has been imprinted in my head. And I suppose, now that I do what I do, there have been other moments in time where I have that same sensation of, ooh, olfactory memory being imprinted in one of those brain waves. And then what happens is like you go through life and you keep searching almost for that same imprint. So I fell in love with fragrance again as an adult. It wasn't that I was trying to replicate that memory, but it was, I guess, kind of that feeling. And I was, something, I was out of college, I needed a job. I walked into this store and it had all these bottles on the wall. I thought, wow, this is a cool place. I want to work here. So I approached the manager who said, who are you? What do you mean you want to work here? We don't need anyone. And I said, all right, I'll come back tomorrow. And he said, no, we don't need anyone tomorrow either. And I said, well, I really feel at home here and I feel like, this is my calling. And he's like, do we have an appointment? Do I know you? So I was like, crazy girl. And the more I stayed there, the more convinced I was that this was a place for me. And then the owner came out from the back and he said, what's going on? And I said, oh, walking by. The voices told me to come inside. And, the other guy's just rolling his eyes. And luckily for me, the owner is, an old hippie. And he's like, all right, groovy. I catch your drift. Come back tomorrow. And what happened was I learned it was a perfumery, and I had been a florist when I was in college, so I knew all the names of the flowers, and I was already designing flower arrangements. So it was just a real marvel to me that you could take basically the same things, combine them, and instead of making a live bouquet, it was bouquet, made with essential oils and other raw materials to a perfume. Wow. And so that was kind of this like epiphany. This is definitely the next step in my life.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
It's a really good answer. So, Yosh, what do your friends and your family think of your love for perfume?
Well, I think at first they thought my parents thought it was a passing fancy, like, oh, I'm just going to grow out of it. And I had been selling eye patches and peg legs just prior, working with a literary center with Dave Eggers and running the pirate store. So they thought, oh, yeah, well, pirate store didn't last that long, and I'm sure the perfumes won't last that long. But then as the years went by, it started to grow very quickly. And so my parents kind of thought, well, maybe this is the thing for her. Maybe this is what she wants to do with her life. And I think it wasn't until I was going to an event in Santa Barbara, and I was kind of half asleep in the back of the car. My parents were driving me, and my dad was talking to a friend of his on speakerphone, and he said, well, his friend said, where are you going? And my dad said, oh, we're driving up to Santa Barbara because my daughter has an event, and I'm her chauffeur, and she's so famous now this is the only time I get to spend with her is if I drive to her event. And so to me, that was like, oh, my dad is really supporting me. And he didn't really say that to me. It was just, I was sleeping and I overheard him bragging about me to a friend of his. So, you know, it didn't take, I mean, it took a long time to get to that place, but when that moment happened, I realized, oh, okay, I think they, not only do they understand me, but they really support me. So that was like a big turning point for me.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Now, you mentioned that you worked at a perfumery. How did you start your career as being your own perfumer and bring out your own line?
Well, you know, going back to the pirate store, I thought it would be really kitsch to make pirate perfumes, so I made like Swashbuckler, Buccaneer, Cavalier, and this is right before Johnny Depp and Pirates of the Caribbean, and so when that whole wave happened, it was, you know, so many people came to buy their eye patches, like it was a big thing. And what from there, a lot of people saw the pirate perfumes because it was a very popular place in San Francisco. And then authors and artists asked for their own custom fragrances. So then I started doing fragrances for the San Francisco Opera, San Francisco Jazz. You know, Lemony Snicket had a custom fragrance made for his mom, things like that. And so, you know, one thing led to another. I thought, oh, I kind of miss the perfumes, and maybe if I can sell tens of thousands of eye patches, I can certainly sell a bottle of perfume. So it kind of went like that, and pretty soon the perfumes really warranted me quitting the pirate store and the perfumes. And, you know, luckily for me, because I had come from publishing, it was, you know, also publishing house, McSweeney's. I had a lot of friends who were authors and journalists, so I was real lucky in the beginning, and I had a lot of editorial. And so, you know, Black Book, Vanity Fair, and then Town and Country, and a lot of the local press picked me up. And so from there, then I had a lot of stores, really important marquee stores like Fred Segal, Lucky Scent, and then there was kind of this quasi-bidding war between Saks, Nordstrom's, and Barney's, and ultimately I chose to launch my collection with Barney's. And so when you have, you know, big stores like Barney's and Lucky Scent, you know, supporting, and it was kind of like, oh, wow, I'm really in business. And, you know, then it starts growing. And every day I still pinch myself like, wow, am I really doing what I'm doing? Because every day is like, you know, you're grateful for these little miracles because I get to do something that I really love, right? So I think, you know, how did I get started? It's been kind of like this nice flowing boat, and you know, if the boat ride is still enjoyable, keep going. And you know, I mean, there's certainly ups and downs, but you know, every day is a new day, and every day is, you know, certainly an adventure.
So how long did it take you to create, prepare, and release your first fragrance?
That's a really good question. So you know, when I was working at that perfumery, I thought, oh, when I grow up and if I ever have my own brand, I wanted to make something that would reflect not just my personality, but how I saw the world. And when I worked there, I saw that people were a little bit like, not stereotypes, but personas, or kind of a personality type, or like, you know, like a character type. And certain types of people would gravitate towards certain elements. So, you know, sporty people tended to wear clean and fresh fragrances, both men and women. And then if you were kind of dressed up, you know, you have some people who are just dressed up when they wake up. I have friends who, like, I don't know, practically go to sleep with makeup on, and they wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and you're like, wow, you look fantastic. I mean, I'm not that person. I gotta really wake up. And so I think it depends on, you know, are you a morning person, or I'm a total night owl, so I feel like I'm really alive at night.
Yeah.
And I think it really speaks to the type of fragrance that you're attracted to. Is if you're clean and sporty, you would appreciate one kind of fragrance. And if you have a spicy personality, you know, you kind of tend to like edgier, more spicy fragrances. You might be more adventurous. And I certainly have a lot of customers, they're a little bit more on the traditional side, so they want what is accessible to them. So maybe a nice floral fragrance, especially, you know, I have a lot of custom clients. A lot of my old customers want something that's more recognizable. Like, oh, I like, a lot of people will say, oh, I wear this fragrance, can you make me something similar? And I'm always like, well, yeah, but why would you want the same thing that you've been wearing? Why wouldn't you want something new, right? And so I do find that the younger customer, especially like women now, I would say like between the ages of 25 and 35, they're willing to wear what's traditionally more men's fragrances. And I think certainly because I live in an urban city, and when I travel, people who live in the city, men will wear fragrances that are traditionally more female. And so I think depending on your personality type, like if you're a guy that can, rock a pink shirt, you don't care about wearing a female fragrance because you're confident in masculinity, right? But if you need to wear like, a more traditional man's fragrance, then you probably tend to be, more generally speaking, fall in that male archetype role. So again, I thought, wow, when I fragrance, sorry about that, I would like to have a whole collection that speaks to the different personas rather than like I didn't come from marketing in the perfume schools, so for me I didn't really have a box to come to out of. I was just, I was literally selling eye patches, which is like very let's say rebellious. I don't have a corporate job, and so I came from that mentality where anything goes. And so with my perfumes, sort of the same thing, anything goes.
Now you mentioned your line, and whenever we smelled your line, we were kind of taken aback by how it seems like there's kind of a singular thread that kind of brings everything together, like a certain commonality. And how would you describe your particular aesthetic or style of your particular line of pure perfumery?
That's a really great question, and I'll describe it by telling you a story about how someone else described my perfume, and I thought, wow, that's really it. I was in Tokyo, and the publicist there was describing my fragrances to someone else, saying, oh, Yosh is a perfumer from California, and she's very light, but at the same time very deep. And I thought, that's exactly right. There's a certain lightness to my fragrances. Yeah. So on that first pass, on that, let's say, superficial level, they're pretty easygoing. But then when you sit with it, you're like, wow, there's a depth and there's a complexity to the fragrances that are like surprising a little bit because you don't expect it in a light fragrance. And I think that's true of just how I am. I'm pretty, I'm optimistic, but I'm also, I have an edge to me, but it's a little bit unexpected because it's almost like there's that front persona, and then there, if you're a complex person, you don't wear everything on your sleeve, and it takes some time to get to know someone. Yeah. And I think even my happy fragrance called Euphoria, on the outset, you're like, wow, it's really juicy, it's so charismatic, it's so happy. But then when you wear it, there's a certain depth that draws out a little bit later. Yeah. And so I would say a lot of my fragrances, the dry down is the gem of the fragrances. Even the ginger chow, people at the first pass might say, oh, it's too coconutty, I don't really like it. But then when you sit with it, it actually turns into a more sensual, woody fragrance rather than just the top notes dry off. It's actually a more complex fragrance, a typical beach fragrance. So people love to say, oh, it's like a very expensive, they might say, oh, it smells like suntan lotion, but a really expensive one. And that's to me a compliment because it tells me that they've actually worn it long enough. Sure, the beach is fun, but to me the beach is also after the season is done, off season, or even afternoon when a lot of the tourists have gone. If you're sunburned, you've already gone home. But, I love the beach when all those people have gone and then you get the beach to yourself. Right. So to me, that's the kind of fragrance that I like to wear is, all right, let all the crazy people out and then what's left, the nugget. And so as a perfume blender or a designer, I think there's that part of me that, all right, here's the friendly part, but then here's the backstory. And to me, that's the juicy part of anything in life. What's the real story? What's the inside scoop, or what's the real deal? And I think too, because I'm from California, there's a certain easiness to our life here. It's very spacious. There's a lot of, I'm near the water, and I think for me as a perfumer, that's how I see the world, right? I mean, I have big horizons, and so there is that, like, let's say, spaciousness, and that's true for all of my fragrances, a certain spaciousness, but then there's that depth, and it's almost like a quietness rather than, I don't feel the need to be the loudest person in the room, and my perfumes aren't that way either. So there's a quietness to them, but they've got personality. I'm definitely not a wallflower, and I'm almost that person that you're like, oh yeah, I definitely want to get to know her. She's not like, I don't have an ego, and my fragrances don't have that, let's say, branded ego either. But when you know my fragrances, you can smell, like you said, that commonality. And even if I try to make something new, they'll say, oh yeah, that smells like you, right? So I'll give it to evaluators, and I did this. I tried to trick someone by putting in someone else's fragrance, and they're like, oh no, this one is your fragrance. So I think you're right. There is a characteristic, there's a commonality, and I hope so. I mean, that's a real, for me, that means that not only does my perfume have a certain personality, but as a perfumer, my stability or the way I see life, that it can be translated into my artwork.
Yeah.
Wow. What challenges have you faced as a perfumer, just in the industry and business and things like that?
That's a really, really good question. It's a really exciting time to be a niche perfumer. I think even within the world of niche, there's this, it's a growing pain, I guess, because you can be an artisan perfumer where, like me, we're sitting in my studio, but I also live in my studio too in another, but, I live and work together. And on the one hand, I feel like I'm still grassroots, but on the other hand, there are some perfumers who say, oh, well, she's established now. She's not blending her own perfumes, where 10 years ago, if you were a shop and you ordered 10 bottles from me, I probably blended it and drove it over to your house or to your store. Whereas now I do outsource quite a bit of my production, because now I'm, bottling up more than a couple hundred. I'm bottling up 1,000 bottles at a time, or, in some cases more. And it's just humanly not physically possible to do that. I mean, I have like a huge project sitting behind me that you can't really see. but and I do have, same assistants who have been coming for the last 10 years have been helping me, but, I don't have such a big company that I can employ people all the time to do the production work. But at the same time, it's really exciting to be able to say, oh yeah, well, some parts come from different parts of the world. It gets assembled in one place, it ships out another place. But at the same time, it's like, I don't have the budget as other, I won't name any names, but there's certainly other independently owned companies that have money behind them. And I don't have that kind of carte blanche to say, oh, okay, well, I'm just going to come out with 10 new fragrances because I feel like it. And certainly I don't have a big marketing budget. I don't have, there's like the financial concerns of being an independent owner, right?
Yeah.
But I think on the other hand, it's probably one of my best advantages is I don't own up to anyone other than myself. So there isn't some like Wizard of Oz saying, oh, well, you need to market a fragrance to, hit that 35 to 45-year-old man, and, it has to fit this, and blah, 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 blah. Like, I'm working on something new, and it's because I want to do it, not because I have to do it. And it's certainly, it's a love rather than I have to.
Yeah.
And I think the other challenge, too, is right now, I would say that it's really exciting to be international, but wow, there are crazy regulations when you think about exporting, which, as Americans, we don't really think about. You're like, oh, okay, I feel like making a product. I could throw it on Etsy or go to the, local craft fair and sell it. And Americans are really supportive of entrepreneurs. But it's not that way when you start playing with the big dogs, so to speak. You have lots of work. And, like even with just like press, all the big publishing companies want a 3-month lead time. I'm like, well, I would love to give you a 3-month lead time, but I don't have that luxury, because that means I have to be so much more organized, and I have to let that, just me, like, I'm talking just straight up business, the cash flow of, I gotta buy my supplies, I gotta pay for the supplies, then I have to make then I gotta make the perfume, then I have to send it out, then I have to ship it to the stores, and then by the time the stores get paid from their clients, it's like 6 months to 18 months before I see that dollar back. That's a serious, financial obligation that if you're a huge company, you have like 1,000 people like me just doing, your everyday job.
It seems like you've been in the business a while. What things do you love and what things do you hate about the fragrance industry in general?
I think, this is a really, really good question, and probably one of my biggest challenges is that people are really uneducated, and really there's a lot of misunderstanding about the fragrance world. And I think for a long time, because perfume has been a certain way for a long time, it was kind of handed to us from, let's say, old Europe. And I think modern times, with young men, women, we don't see perfume the same way. And then, just retail, you can't really get the kind of service that you need to sell the perfume in the same format. So there's two challenges, right? The communication, like, how can you get me a perfume by attacking me at the department store? Nobody likes that. And why do people do that? I don't know. Like, it just kills me. Like, and then if I say to someone, oh, well, that ingredient, let's say, like I went to the fragrance counter, I said, wow, that's a lot of galbanum in there. Because I know what that smells like, and I know that that's the thing that's going to get that sharp edge that I personally don't like. And then the person on the other end is like, oh no, it's violet and jasmine that you're smelling. And I'm like, or there's just a lot of misinformation. I was reading on Facebook the other day, someone made a post about like the synthetic materials about absolutes. And I'm like, that question wasn't even, it was like asking, do apples have 4 legs? And I was like, how can you answer that question in Facebook? Yeah. And so there's a lot of enthusiasm, and you want to support that enthusiasm, but there's a lot of, communication that needs to happen as an industry, and, so for me, I try to teach classes, and I want to teach a class just on communication, like, it's called the vocabulary of aromas. And, just to pull it back from the whole, I'm going to teach you something and then I'm going to sell you a $500 bottle of perfume. No, let's just talk about what we're smelling, because I don't really understand it, right? So, for example, I went to the French American school, a bunch of 3rd graders, I think they're 11 years old, I don't even remember, and I gave them some easy smells, but then I gave them some tricky smells. I had them smell fennel. And this kid says, I said, what do you think it smells like? And he said, fennel? Wow, I like it. It smells cool, refreshing, and grouchy. And I thought, that is brilliant. And when, like, how can we bring that to the retail market where we're just smelling raw materials and there's no right and wrong? Oh, man, you got that fragrance family incorrect. And, it's not a floral, it's a fruit. Or it's a chypre, not a fougere, and it's so complicated that even the perfume enthusiast, of course you have people who are like, I know everything, but for the average person who just wants to buy a $50 bottle of perfume, not to dumb it down, but to make it more accessible, to make it easier, to make it more enjoyable. Like, do you like this? Like, never mind what it is, just go with the feeling. Like I always tell people, if you don't like the way my perfume smells, please don't buy it. Like, don't buy it because you want to be my friend. Like, you should buy the fragrance that you like to smell on yourself, and it smells good on your skin. Like, let's just take all that other stuff away. Yeah. And so I think that challenge of also the language and then the retail environment, I think it is so, impersonal, a place where you can't touch, you can't, like if you're going to buy a $10 t-shirt, you can go to a dressing room and try it on and look at yourself in the mirror.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when you have perfume, you have this like attention from the salesperson who's like, what do you think? Let me smell your arm. And it's kind of aggressive, like it's like you suddenly feel like obligated to do this performance, and you're just like, and it's really somehow then not so pleasurable. And I feel like perfume is one of the most luxurious, pleasurable things that we can still experience, because look at us, we're having this conversation on the internet basically, but the main difference is if I was in person, we could smell each other, right? Like it would tell me a lot if I knew what you smelled like and what you smelled like, because that tells me a lot about you actually. And in certain cultures, certainly you're like, oh, sorry, I don't know why that keeps going out. Is when you greet a person, it's by smell.
Yeah.
That was a really long-winded answer, sorry.
No.
Here's a hint. I smell great right now.